I never thought my job would lead me to a moment like this. As I walked into the bustling diner that morning, dressed in a simple uniform with a name tag that read Emily, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. No one here knew who I really was. To them, I was just another new employee trying to make ends meet. But in reality, I was on a mission. One that would change the way I saw everything. The diner, Joe's Grill, had been in business for years. But lately, things hadn't been going well. Customer complaints had increased, employee morale seemed low, and profits were dropping. That's why the owner, Mr. Jameson, had decided to go undercover. But instead of doing it himself, he asked me, his longtime assistant, to take on the role. He trusted me to observe, to understand, and to find out what was really happening behind the scenes. So here I was, pretending to be a struggling worker, ready to blend in and uncover the truth. The moment I stepped inside, the aroma of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. Waitresses rushed from table to table, balancing plates and taking orders. Behind the counter, a middle-aged cook flipped pancakes with practiced ease. And then there was him. A young man, no older than 20, wiping down tables with quick, efficient movements. His uniform was slightly worn, his shoes scuffed, but it wasn't his appearance that caught my attention. It was the exhaustion in his eyes. Something told me he carried a weight heavier than just work stress. I didn't know then that he was about to change everything. From the moment I started my shift, I noticed how hardworking he was. His name tag read, Jake. Unlike some of the other employees who moved at a sluggish pace, Jake never stopped. He cleaned tables, refilled drinks, and took orders, all while wearing a tired but polite smile. I watched as an older waitress, Linda, called out to him. "Jake, can you cover table 7? Mark called in sick again." Without hesitation, he nodded, grabbing his notepad and heading toward the table. There was no complaint, no sigh of frustration, just quiet acceptance. As I worked beside him, I realized he wasn't just hardworking. He was kind. When an elderly man fumbled with his coffee cup, Jake rushed over to steady it before it spilled. When a mother struggled to calm her crying toddler, Jake crouched down and handed the child a napkin folded into the shape of a bunny. The little girl giggled, her tears forgotten. I couldn't help but ask, "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 2 years," he said, wiping down the counter. "Trying to save up for school, but, life has other plans sometimes." He forced a small smile, but his eyes held a sadness he didn't voice. I wanted to ask more, but before I could, the manager, Mr. Stevens, walked in. His expression was as sour as always. "Jake, I need you to stay late again tonight. We're short-staffed." Jake hesitated for a split second before nodding. "Of course, sir." I frowned. He had just worked a full shift, and now he had to stay even longer? "Do you ever get a break?" I asked once the manager walked away. Jake chuckled, but it lacked humor. "Not really, but it's fine. Gotta do what you gotta do, right?" I didn't respond. But something about the way he said it, so resigned, so used to being overworked, made my heart ache. And I had a feeling there was more to his story than he was letting on. As the day went on, I kept an eye on Jake, quietly observing him without making it obvious. I couldn't help but notice how he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, even in his quietest moments. During a quick break, I saw him sitting in the employee lounge, staring down at his phone. I could hear the low hum of the diner's kitchen and the chatter of the other employees. But Jake was lost in his own world. I approached him slowly, trying to sound casual. "You okay?" I asked, leaning against the wall. He looked up at me, startled, before quickly tucking his phone away. Yeah, just stuff to take care of." His smile was small, but there was something unspoken in the way he looked at me. I wasn't fooled. "I get it," I said quietly, wanting to ease the tension. "But you don't have to carry it all by yourself." He shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming on the edge of the table. "I don't have much choice. I've got bills to pay, rent's due, and school, well, that's on hold until I can save up enough." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I'm doing what I can, but it's not enough. It never feels like enough." There was a rawness to his words, an honesty I hadn't expected. It hit me hard, the realization that he was doing everything he could just to survive, yet the world seemed to keep piling more on his shoulders. Before I could respond, the manager, Mr. Stevens, popped his head into the room. "Jake, you're needed out front. Table 12 is waiting." Jake stood up quickly, forcing a smile. Coming right up. I watched him leave, feeling a lump form in my throat. How much more could one person take before they broke? How long could he keep this up? And yet, he kept going. He kept pushing forward, carrying the weight of his life without anyone truly seeing the burden he bore. It wasn't until later that night, after the diner had emptied out and most of the staff was winding down, that I stumbled across something that would change everything. I had been helping to clean up the back room when I noticed a small piece of paper, crumpled and tucked under one of the tables. Curious, I picked it up. It wasn't a bill or an advertisement, it was a handwritten note. The handwriting was neat, but hurried, like it had been written in a moment of desperation. I unfolded it slowly, unsure of what I was about to read. The note said, "I don't know if you'll ever see this, but I need to write it down. I can't keep pretending everything is fine. I'm not fine. I don't know how much longer I can keep going like this. I've tried so hard, too hard, but it feels like nothing changes. I've lost so much, my family, my dreams, the hope I had for the future. I don't want to be a failure, but sometimes I feel like I'm failing at everything. I just want someone to understand, someone to see me. If anyone cares at all, please. Don't let me fall too far. I don't know if I can get back up." My breath caught in my throat as I read the last few lines. It was Jake's handwriting. Suddenly, the weight of everything he had been hiding, the pain, the exhaustion, the desperation, hit me all at once. It wasn't just about working long hours or paying bills. There was so much more beneath the surface. He wasn't just struggling with money, he was struggling with his sense of self-worth, his hope for the future. I looked around the diner, my heart aching for him. How many people had walked through those doors and never noticed the person who was holding everything together behind the scenes? How many had brushed past him, not realizing the emotional burden he carried? I folded the note back carefully and slid it into my pocket. I wasn't sure what to do with it yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't just leave him to face all of this alone. And then, as if on cue, I saw Jake again. He was wiping down the counter, his face still strained with exhaustion, but determined to keep moving. The weight of his struggles was invisible to everyone else, but it was so clear to me now. What was I supposed to do? How could I help him when I didn't even know where to start? But I knew one thing. Jake deserved more than to be invisible. The following days passed in a blur. The diner was busy, and Jake worked tirelessly, as always. But now, I couldn't stop thinking about the note I had found. I couldn't forget the raw emotion in his words. It was clear that Jake was struggling, but no one seemed to notice. Everyone around him was too busy with their own lives, too caught up in their own problems to see the quiet battle he was fighting. And it frustrated me. I wanted to do something, anything, to make him feel seen, to make him feel like he mattered. One afternoon, after the lunch rush, I found myself at the counter sitting beside Jake. He was wiping down the surface in front of me, his movements slow and tired. I wanted to say something, anything, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up. I couldn't just confront him about the note, that wasn't my place. But then, without thinking, I spoke. "Jake, you ever think about leaving?" He looked at me surprised by the question. "Leaving? Like leaving the diner?" "Yeah," I said softly. "Just going somewhere else, somewhere different, somewhere you can breathe." He didn't respond right away. His eyes flickered down to the counter and I saw the briefest flash of longing in his gaze. "Sometimes. But I don't know if I can. I've got responsibilities. People depend on me. I can't just walk away." I nodded slowly, understanding the weight of his words. "I get that. But you don't have to carry everything on your own, you know?" Jake looked up at me then, his eyes locking onto mine. For the first time, I saw a crack in his armor. "I don't know what else to do," he admitted quietly. "I've been trying so hard, but it feels like I'm always failing." My heart broke for him. I could feel the desperation in his voice, the exhaustion that he tried so hard to hide. But I also saw something else, something I hadn't noticed before. Hope. It was faint, barely a flicker, but it was there. "You're not failing, Jake," I said, my voice steady. "You're just going through a hard time, and that's okay. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep going, one step at a time." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine as if trying to find something. And then, slowly, A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Thanks, Emily," he said softly. I needed to hear that. It was a simple moment, but it felt like a breakthrough. For the first time in weeks, I saw Jake take a deep breath, like he wasn't carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders anymore, at least not for that brief moment. I didn't know what the future held for him. I didn't know if he would ever find the peace he deserved. But I knew this: I wouldn't let him face it alone. I wasn't going to let him fade into the background, unnoticed and forgotten. It had been a week since that conversation. Things hadn't exactly changed for Jake, but I noticed little shifts. He seemed to be smiling more, even if it was just a small one. He didn't carry himself with quite the same heaviness that had weighed him down before. The other employees had started to notice too. They mentioned how much more relaxed he looked, how he seemed to have more energy, as if he wasn't so worn down by life anymore. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was something. One evening, as we were getting ready to close, I saw Jake standing by the back door, looking out into the dimming street. The diner had emptied out, and the usual clatter of plates and silverware had faded into a quiet hum. "Hey," I called, walking over to him. Jake turned to me with a surprised look. "Oh, hey. Didn't see you there." I paused for a moment, unsure of how to continue. But then I realized I didn't need to say anything extraordinary. Sometimes just being there was enough. "I just wanted to check in," I said quietly. "How are you doing, really?" For a moment he didn't answer. He just stood there, looking at the floor, as if he was thinking carefully about how to respond. Then he met my eyes. "I'm better," he said softly, a small, genuine smile tugging at his lips. "I don't have all the answers. Life's still tough, but it's a little easier to breathe now. I guess I've realized that I don't have to figure it all out on my own." I smiled back, feeling a warmth in my chest. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. A small victory in a world that often seemed too overwhelming to navigate. "I'm glad to hear that," I said. "You deserve to feel that way, Jake. You're worth so much more than you give yourself credit for." He didn't respond at first, but his eyes softened. "Thanks, Emily. I really appreciate it." Before I could say anything else, the sound of footsteps echoed through the diner. It was Mr. Stevens, the manager. "Jake?" he called, walking toward us with his usual business-like demeanor. "I need you to work an extra shift this weekend. We've got a big party coming in, and you're the best we've got." Jake looked at him, his face neutral but determined. For a moment I thought he might agree to the extra hours, as he always did. But then, to my surprise, he spoke. "Actually, Mr. Stevens, I can't do it." Mr. Stevens raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard. "What do you mean? We're short-staffed. You're the only one who can handle this." Jake stood up straighter, his voice steady. "I understand, but I need to take care of myself for once. I've been working non-stop for too long, and it's taking a toll on me. I need to step back for a little while, even if it's just one weekend." There was a long pause as Mr. Stevens stared at Jake. I held my breath, unsure of how he would respond. Finally, Mr. Stevens grunted, clearly frustrated. "Fine. But don't expect any more time off. We're running a business here, not a charity." Jake didn't flinch. He simply nodded, then turned back to me with a quiet sigh. As Mr. Stevens walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Jake had stood up for himself. It wasn't easy, and I could tell it had taken a lot of courage. But he had done it. In that moment, I knew that things weren't perfect, but they were getting better. Little by little, Jake was learning to value himself. He was starting to realize that he wasn't defined by his struggles, and he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders alone. And maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to believe that he was worthy of a better life. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. It was a quiet morning, and the diner had only a handful of customers. The staff was finishing their usual morning preparations, and Jake was back at the counter, calmly taking orders. I had just finished refilling the coffee pot when the bell above the door jingled, signaling the arrival of a new customer. I turned, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw who had walked in. It was Mr. Carter, the man I now knew to be the diner's owner. He wasn't just a businessman. He was also the one who had made such a lasting impression on Jake with his kindness and understanding. I hadn't seen him since that day at the diner event, but his presence now was just as commanding. He scanned the room briefly before his eyes landed on Jake. I saw the way Jake froze for a moment, a look of shock and confusion crossing his face. He wasn't expecting this. But Mr. Carter walked over to him without hesitation, a warm smile on his face. "Jake," he said, his voice calm and genuine. "I wanted to thank you for all your hard work, for everything you do here. I know you've been through a lot, and I just wanted to let you know that I see you." Jake blinked, clearly taken aback by the words. I watched as his face softened, a quiet emotion flickering in his eyes. I don't know what to say," Jake stammered, clearly overwhelmed. "I didn't expect you to even remember me." Mr. Carter chuckled softly. "Of course I remember you. You're one of the most dedicated employees we've ever had. But I also know you've been struggling, and I want to do what I can to help." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the counter to Jake. "I want you to take this. It's a scholarship for you to go back to school, to pursue whatever dreams you have. You've worked hard, and you deserve more than just a job. You deserve a chance to build the life you've always wanted." Jake stared at the envelope, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for it, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you serious?" "I'm serious," Mr. Carter replied. "You've shown incredible resilience, Jake, and I believe in you. It's time for you to believe in yourself, too." The room went silent. For a moment I couldn't breathe, watching Jake as he stood there, processing the words. I saw the tears welling up in his eyes, the realization of what this meant. "I don't know what to say," Jake whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't need to say anything," Mr. Carter said gently. "Just take this as a sign that you are valued, that you are worth so much more than you know." And for the first time, Jake let out a breath. A deep, heartfelt exhale as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He finally looked up at Mr. Carter, his eyes filled with gratitude and awe. "Thank you," Jake said, his voice steady, though his hands still trembled. "I'll make sure to use this chance, I promise." As Mr. Carter nodded and left the diner, I couldn't help but feel a wave of pride for Jake. He wasn't the same man I had met all those months ago. He was stronger, more confident, and most importantly, he was starting to believe in the possibility of a better future. And as I stood there, watching him carefully hold the scholarship, I realized that this moment, this kindness, had given Jake something no one else could ever take away. Hope. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an update. Like if you felt inspired by Jake's journey, and feel free to leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you think someone else would enjoy this story, please share it with them. Your support means the world to us. Thanks for watching.